Hello video viewers, and I'm just saying this to those of you who are watching this on YouTube. I expect you've noticed that you can't see me. You might be thinking, what's going on? Where's Luke? What's wrong? Why can't I see him? Why can't I see his majestic face? Is there something wrong with my internet? It's all gone black. What happened? Did Luke record this at night? Well, no, it's not because I forgot to turn the lights on in my pod room. That's not the reason. It's because I'm afraid there is no video version for this episode. I tried to do a video version for this. I set up my camera. I recorded the whole thing, or I thought I had. I thought I'd recorded all of it. But when I finished, I checked the recording, and shock horror, the camera wasn't running. No video had been captured, which is just like one of those podcasting nightmares. To be honest, no video is better than no audio. It has happened in the past where I've done an episode and then checked the recording and I've got the video but didn't record the audio. I mean, that's useless. There's nothing I can do with that. At least with this, you've got the words. You've got all the English. You've got all the things. You can actually listen to me. That's the whole point of this podcast after all. But anyway, how frustrating. I mean, I nearly flipped the table. It's kind of the podcaster's worst nightmare. Doing a whole thing, recording a whole thing, and then realizing that something went wrong with the recording. It's immensely frustrating and infuriating. So, needless to say, I was absolutely gutted. I say needless to say, I have actually already said it. I've explained it to you. But anyway, I was gutted. But I'm okay. I'm over it now. It's okay. I've made peace with that. You know, I meditated for a while. And had a cup of tea, and it's all right now. But anyway, there's no video for this, and I want to extend this same sense of peace of mind to you now, because you might be thinking, all is lost, this is hopeless, there's no video version for this. It's fine, guys. It's absolutely fine. It's okay. You can still listen to an hour of me talking on the podcast in this episode, and I think it's a good episode. I enjoyed doing it. I really enjoyed doing this, and I think that you'll enjoy listening to it too. At least I hope so, just like always. And if you've never just listened to my podcast, if you've never only listened to the audio version, if you've only ever watched the podcast at the same time, right? If you're just a video person, if you've never just listened to the audio version, well, this is your chance to try it. This is what it's like. And you know what? It's actually great. Just listening without the visuals is a slightly different experience. You can do other things with your eyes now, right? You can look out of the window or stare into the middle distance, or you can do something else while you listen, like you can just do some housework, do some tidying up. I mean, look at the place. Look around you. I mean, it's, you know, really, I think you should tidy up a little bit. And you can now. You don't have to stare at the screen, thinking of getting distracted by thoughts of my appearance, how much hair is on my face, or what some other thing which will be distracting you. You can just forget about all that stuff and just focus on the listening. But yeah, you can do other things with your eyes. You can look at other stuff, or you can do other things. You can do some housework or whatever it is you want. If you want, you can close your eyes. Just close your eyes if you want, unless you're listening at work, obviously, and you're in some job that definitely involves having your eyes open. You know, I mean, in most jobs, you should probably keep your eyes open, especially if you're in a meeting or something. If you're in a meeting with your team and they're like, Steve, like let's say your name is Steve. Steve, are you all right? It's like, yeah, I'm fine. Like you've got your eyes closed. Yeah, I'm just listening, but it's a bit weird. Anyway, you could just close your eyes unless you're in one of those jobs where you definitely need to keep your eyes open. Like, for example, you work in the control center of a nuclear power station, right? And you need to keep your eye on all of those flashing lights and readings and dials, and I don't know what the control center of a nuclear power station looks like, but I'm imagining there are different meters and red warning lights that flash on and off in case if something bad happens. Obviously, you need to keep your eyes peeled for that. Don't close your eyes if that's the case. And other situations, of course, like maybe you're the security guard at a high security banking facility and you're looking at a big, like, a massive panel, a massive sort of wall of screens. And you've got to basically stare at all those screens to make sure that some guys with big bags aren't running into the building to steal all of the money, or maybe you work in a casino and similarly you're sitting behind a desk looking at lots of screens of gamblers and you've got to make sure no one's like doing any secret cheating. If you catch someone cheating, you need to send the heavy set guys down to the gambling table to kind of discreetly remove this gambler who's cheating and then take them into a back room and like smack their hands with a hammer or something. I don't know what you do in casinos. Not that all casinos do that. Anyway, unless you're in a job where you need to be looking at things all the time, you could just close your eyes, right? If you're the pilot of a jumbo jet, if you're the pilot of a 747 jumbo jet who is about to land at Heathrow Airport, again, obviously you will need to keep your eyes open while you're listening to this. In fact, to be honest, you should probably be listening. You probably shouldn't be listening to this if you're trying to land a jumbo jet full of passengers at Heathrow Airport or any airport for that matter. You should probably be listening to your co-pilots and the air traffic controller in the tower. But you get what I mean. I think I've made my point. Listening to audio podcasts is great, and it's how you listen to this show in its purest form in a way. This is how the podcast started, right, as an audio-only podcast. And this is how, to be honest, I always intended it to be heard by my audience. Just like this. This is Luke's English Podcast in its purest form. Just my voice with no other distractions. You can focus purely on the sounds of English, the sounds of my voice, and the words, phrases and sentences coming through the speaker or headphones, right? It's more of it's a kind of purer form of listening, I think. It's like reading a book instead of watching a film, Reading a book instead of watching a film. It's a different experience, but it's perhaps more enjoyable because you get to use your own visual imagination a bit and you can be immersed in it a bit more. It opens up something creative in your mind as you naturally start to picture in your own imagination some of the things I'm talking about. Your own sort of natural ability to picture things in your mind's eye is allowed. It's opened when you're just listening, right? And that makes it somehow more immersive, I think. So this is the audio-only experience. I hope you enjoy it. And if you do like this, then you could consider listening to the audio version in the future every time. Just download a free podcast app on your phone. There are lots of them available. You might have one on your phone already, the Apple Podcast app. Or I always recommend Pocket Casts, which is available free for all the phones. It's iOS and Android. It's on iOS and Android. Pocket Casts. Just search for it. It's free. Download it. They don't sponsor this podcast or anything. It's just a good podcast app for lots of reasons. But you could download that or any other podcast app. Search for Luke's English Podcast and then subscribe to it. And when you do that, you'll automatically get every episode I publish and you'll be able to enjoy listening to the audio version while you liberate your eyes and in fact also the rest of your body too, because you can listen while you travel around if you want or need to. You don't need to stay locked in front of a screen. Okay, that's the great thing about the audio podcast. Anyway, I'm rambling so much in this section here for only the video people. So anyway, I'll let this episode begin now, and I hope that you listen to the entire thing from start to finish. There's no need to do that all in one go. Feel free to pause when you need to, and when you come back to this episode, you can just continue from where you stopped and jump back into this audio world of words that I've created for you. If you're signed into YouTube, it should remember where you where you were when you stopped, all right? So you don't need to listen to the whole thing. If it makes any difference, there is a song at the end of this one, which will perhaps broaden the scope of this audio experience for you a little bit. Next week, in next week's podcast, it will be back to podcasting as usual, and I'll make sure that my camera is recording everything in the future. So there'll be a video version for next week's episode. And you'll hear me mention what next week's episode is in this episode. All right? Okay, it's time for me to stop rambling and then let you listen to the things I rambled about earlier today. I'm recording this particular bit fairly late in the evening. I'm in the cupboard dressing room thing in our flat, a small room where we keep all the clothes, and it happens to be the quietest place. So I'm sure you're really glad that you know that now. You can picture that. But let's now go back to earlier this afternoon when I recorded this ramble quite hastily, right? If you do something in a hasty way, it means you do it in a bit of a hurry, right? So I had to be quite hasty in the recording of this episode. It was a last-minute, spontaneous rambling episode that I recorded at the end of the afternoon today on Friday, when I realised that I didn't have any time actually to record anything else before I had to publish something at the beginning of next week. Anyway, there's no need for me to say this because you're going to hear me talking about it any moment now. But anyway, let's go back a few hours to the end of the afternoon when I decided I suddenly had to record something, and that is what you're going to listen to now. Okay? All right. Great. So let's now quickly go back in time, and I'll stop rambling now so that you can hear me rambling from the past. Okay? Let's do that right now. By the way, that was the sound of us sort of rapidly flying backwards through time. But obviously you knew that, didn't you? Yes. Hello there, welcome back to Luke's English Podcast. How are you doing today? I hope you're doing fine. Now, this is going to be a rambling episode, and one of the reasons why this is a rambling episode is because I don't have a lot of time to prepare an episode today. I mean, I've got a very limited amount of time. It's Friday, 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, and this is like right at the end of the week for me. We've got a long weekend coming up. That means Saturday, Sunday, Monday, because Monday is a public holiday in France, because it's May, and there are about 1 billion public holidays in May in France, and so it makes it very hard to get anything done sort of work-wise. It's nice, but from a work point of view, it means that suddenly your time gets reduced, right? You end up with far less time than you expected. So you find me here, or at least in this episode, here I am, starting the recording of an episode at 4:30, and so I've given myself a very strict sort of time limit here, because I've got to be out of the door to be able to go and get my son from daycare, probably in about 45 minutes. So let's see if we can do this in 45 minutes. Also, I would have just not recorded something now and done this at another time, but the fact is that this is the last remaining time I have to actually get something recorded and prepared to be published for you at the beginning of next week, because I like to try and provide you with one episode per week, right? That's what I try to do, an episode a week, but sometimes I find that I've run out of time and I don't have an episode ready, and that's kind of what's happened this week. I was working on something which was supposed to be published at the beginning of next week, but it's just not going to be ready. And I just realised, I thought, oh, right, actually, looking ahead, I can't do podcast work on Saturday, can't do podcast work on Sunday, and I won't be able to do podcast work on Monday either, because that's going to be like another family day, just, as I said, a long weekend. So I realised, oh my God, I've only got the next hour or so today on Friday afternoon to actually record something, to be able to publish something for you. So it's going to be a rambling episode. That's the advantage. One of the advantages of doing these rambling episodes is that I can kind of hopefully the idea is like do it without any preparation. Some rambling episodes have a lot of preparation involved. I write a lot of things down and there's lots of specific things I want to talk to you about. And sometimes I write rambling scripts and everything over, like finger rambles, as I've called them in the past, where I actually write the whole thing in advance, and that way I can carefully prepare exactly what I'm going to say. But not this time. This is going to be the rambling episode in the purest sense, meaning that there's almost nothing prepared. All I've got is just a few very hastily prepared, scribbled notes on a spare piece of paper which I had lying on the desk, a piece of paper which has got stand-up comedy ideas written all over it. Things like going to the gym and French rationalism and using English as a superpower and talking about English food and Star Wars and meeting Americans and stuff. That's all stuff that this is all stuff that I try to work on for my stand-up material, talking about shaving my beard and other things. The way that English people go, "Kuh," right? Whereas French people kind of go, I mean, it's comedy gold, of course, but anyway, that's what's written on the other side. But here I've just written some very hastily assembled notes for things I want to talk about. So, yes. How are you doing, listeners? Are you all right? Yes, here we are. It's podcast time. This is your chance to listen to some real English being spoken. And in this case, spontaneous English, a spontaneous sort of stream of consciousness monologue kind of thing. Now, what I thought when I started recording this, when I thought, okay, I'll do a rambling episode because I don't have any time, so I've just got to talk and do a podcast and try and make it as good as possible, so I've got something to publish when it comes to publishing time at the beginning of next week. I expect this will go up on Tuesday. It seems that Tuesday afternoon has become the new podcast publication day. Who knows, it might go back to Mondays. It doesn't matter. But when I thought, right, what I'll talk about the gig that I saw on Wednesday night. That's just 2 nights ago. I went to see a concert at a big concert venue in Paris, in the Bercy Accor Arena, which I think it's probably the biggest live music concert venue that they have inside the city limits of Paris. Huge place. It's where, when all the big acts, when they come to Paris, they play at the Bercy Arena. And on Wednesday, I went to a gig there, and it was just great. I just loved it so much, and it was a chance for me to see a band that I've been a fan of for a long time, for several decades now. I never really thought I'd see them live, and it was a nice surprise when a friend of mine offered me a ticket to go and see them. So I'm going to tell you about that. That's the idea. So, but anyway, I was talking. So I'm going to talk about that, and I'm also going to maybe play a song, but we'll see how it goes. Maybe I won't get time to do it. I don't know. It's a bit of a mad rush. But I was saying, yes, May in Paris is a very difficult month to get things done because of all these public holidays. And sometimes the public holidays sort of take you by surprise, or at least they take me by surprise. In England, public holidays always, except for Easter and Christmas, all our other public holidays are just automatically put on a Monday. So you've got a pretty good idea when they're going to be. We've got like one at the end of May, we've got one at the beginning of August, one at the end of August. That's kind of it. Then there's like 2 at Easter. You get the Friday and the Monday at Easter, and then there's 2 at Christmas. That's Christmas Day and Boxing Day, the day after. I don't think I'm missing anything else. That's basically it for our public holidays. But in France, there are more public holidays, and they don't always arrive on a Monday, or they're not automatically placed to the they're not put at the. They're not moved to the nearest Monday. They could just land at any day. So every year, I feel like people in France, at some point, check the calendar to see where all the public holidays are going to be. And it's always, I think, probably very exciting. It's like an adrenaline rush. Like, where are the public holidays going to be? Are they going to be on Mondays, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday? Or are they, the worst case scenario in France is if those public holidays land on a weekend? Because that means that you don't get a day off. Your public holiday has been wasted because it's landed on a Saturday or Sunday, and you have the day off then anyway. So the ideally what you want in France, if you don't want to work, at least if you want to have a day off, if you want to have lots of days off, which I think most people do, you ideally want your public holidays to land Monday to Friday. Now, a Monday is good because you get automatically a long weekend. A Friday is good, it's the same thing, another long weekend. But in France, you've got this other thing. It might be the same in other countries, I don't know, you can let me know. This other thing, which is when a public holiday lands on a Tuesday or on a Thursday, and they do this thing called the bridge, which is where you let's say it happens on a Thursday, you get the Thursday off because it's the public holiday, but then a lot of people take the Friday off as well, and just like almost it seems like the whole country just decides that Friday is just a pointless waste of time, and so let's just take the Friday off as well, and you end up with Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and that's called the bridge. And then sometimes you get I think it's possible that you can get the Thursday off, and then everyone takes the Friday off, but then you also get a Monday off as well, and that becomes like a mega bridge. And it's also possible that it will land on the Wednesday, right? The day off lands on a Wednesday, and it's very confusing, but you can have something, you can even have this year, I can't remember now, because I get so confused by the calendar, but this year there was this mega bridge, which involved like a super long weekend. I think people took 2 or 3 days off in a row because of the way the holidays landed. And they took what were they calling it? It's like, what's the biggest kind of bridge you can think of? Ones that carry water. Damn it, why can't I remember the word now? Viaduct, that's right. So people took a viaduct, or a viaduct, I guess is the French word for it. But people were talking about having a viaduct, which is like a very big bridge. A viaduct is like an old Roman bridge that carries water, So anyway, May is a tricky month. So if you're like me and you work for yourself and you've got to organise your time and you need to be very productive and you need as many days in the week, as possible to make your podcast episodes, then May can be a tricky month because it means that suddenly you realise that your available time gets completely reduced. Also, other life-related things have meant that it's been the last 2 weeks I haven't really got much done. Plus, we had we had time off. That mega bridge, that viaduct I was talking about. We went to London. We went to my parents. So that was like a good 6 days where I couldn't work on the podcast. So it's not been the most productive time for Luke's English podcast, which is one of the reasons why I'm in this kind of slightly frantic state today, where I have to record this episode. What else? But it also means that my production schedule, not schedule, that's another story for another time. Schedule, but basically schedule is American English, schedule is British English. So I have to say schedule. So my production schedule has been a little bit disorganized this month, but I've got lots of episodes in the pipeline, and I've recorded a lot of episodes with other people, collaborations or conversations, interviews. And for example, I recorded one earlier today. I had a friend here in the room with me, and some others. I've got one, two, three, four, five, at least 5, possibly 6 episodes with guests in the pipeline in various states of preparation. I was intending to publish one with my brother, which I recorded a few weeks ago. That was supposed to be the one I published today, but it's definitely not going to be ready because I think it needs a bit of work. I'm trying to edit it together in a certain way. I'm adding in little audio clips and even video clips into that episode. So that episode is going to be another one about music with my brother James. And I'm wondering, whenever I do episodes about music with James, where we talk about a specific thing, a specific cultural stuff, like talking about a specific band or talking about a specific film or something like that, I often wonder, to what extent that's going to be interesting for everyone listening. But I've been doing those episodes with James about British cultural stuff for years and years on this podcast. So it's like a long-running tradition, and I really enjoy doing those episodes, and I think that they are a kind of a part of a core part of what this podcast is about. It's always been like that. Obviously I do stories, I do rambles, I do episodes explaining jokes and things like the last week's episode. I'm very glad to see that was well received by everyone. I'm really glad you liked it. I do these sorts of standard ones. I do episodes with guests where we talk about things that I hope will be relevant for learners of English, like, for example, the communication episode with Matt Abrahams, where he talked about speaking spontaneously, the episode with Barbara Serra recently, the Italian journalist who described her relationship with English and how her job as a broadcast journalist involves considerations of English and what it really means to be a native speaker and all that stuff. So in the midst of all those sorts of episodes, I also have always done episodes about sort of British popular culture. And I know that there are people in my audience who really like those episodes. There might also be some people who perhaps don't see the relevance, or maybe it don't feel that they can relate to it in some way. But anyway, the episode in question, which I've been editing and which I was hoping to upload here in this slot for episode 883, it'll probably arrive next week instead. It's an episode about a British band called Madness. Right, now, I don't know if you all know about Madness, because I've got people from all over the world, of course, listening to this, people of different ages, but there's probably going to be certain members of certain demographics in my audience that definitely know Madness. Do you know them? Have you ever heard of the band Madness? They were popular in the 70s and 80s, particularly in the 80s, but they're still popular, they're still going today. And certainly for James and me, they are one of our favourite bands of all time, and certainly one of the most successful British bands ever. And they've got like a really strong kind of identity. They're really associated with England, really associated specifically with a very specific part of North London, Camden. And I just love Madness. My brother loves Madness so much. We grew up as kids listening to Madness. We're both really big fans of Madness, so we decided we would love to do an episode about Madness. And so you'll be able to hear us talking about that. And I hope you find it interesting. Oh, there's a police siren outside? Well, of course, it's the big bad city. There's always going to be. Maybe they're trying to catch bank robbers or something. I don't know. French bank robbers who've stolen a bag of euros. And the police are chasing them with baguettes like that. It's just a typical situation in Paris. It happens all the time. So there's that. Yeah, so that's coming next week. I expect an episode about Madness, and I'm just kind of like mentioning it because I just want to kind of prepare you for that, for the fact that next week it's going to be one of those special or specialised episodes about music with James that appeal a lot to some people in my audience, and then maybe some other people in the audience you might feel like, I'm not, I don't see the relevance of this. I can tell that because I'll publish an episode, like I did one with James about ambient music a while ago. And, those sorts of episodes, and they just seem to get less attention. Sometimes you just get comments under those episodes, things like, please do a story episode, which normally means I don't like this episode that you've published, and I think you should only do story episodes. Or even something like, I found this episode too difficult to understand, which, I appreciate, when you're listening to me talking about a specific subject, it's harder for you to engage with it and therefore probably harder to understand. Although, having said that, I did an episode earlier this year, I think it was, when I talked about the Beatles and talked about their song, the last Beatles song that was published earlier this year. And, people really enjoyed listening to that because there was a story attached to it. And I'm hoping to do that with this. So let me tell you about Right, I'm still not ready to tell you about this concert. I'm just sort of stringing you along a little bit here. I just want to say something else. So I was interviewed by an old friend of mine who has set up a podcast. Right, this old friend of mine, an old colleague of mine who I used to work with in London. He's recently set up a podcast with his friend. And the concept of the podcast is that they talk to people about their work, right? That's That's the focus. It's all about asking people about their work and finding out the stories of how they started doing that particular job, that particular occupation. And it's actually fascinating. They have some very interesting guests. They've done about 26 episodes so far. There's one with a teacher, one with a photographer, an episode with a massage therapist who was also a headmistress of a school, a conversation with a music engineer, a conversation with a vet, right? An animal doctor, veterinary doctor, a fitness coach, a diversity champion, a helicopter pilot, a bookshop owner, a nurse, a TV cook, a hostage, someone who was kidnapped in Iraq in 2007 and held hostage, a Royal Marine Commando, a psychotherapist, a writer, a comedian, a cafe owner, a museum manager, an interior architect, a lifeboat helm, someone who drives a lifeboat, a sheep farmer, an A&R veteran. That's someone who basically represents someone who works in the music industry, a stunt performer, someone who does stunts in movies, and then an English language podcaster. That's me, of course. And I just wanted to let you know about the episode. You could listen to it if you want. If this episode is not enough for you, you could also check out this episode of my friend's podcast. The podcast is called R Balls. Okay, AARBALLS, R Balls. And you can find it on Spotify. You'll also find it on the page for this episode on my website. And, you know, they just interviewed me about my life and about my work. But because I know Martin, the guy who runs the podcast, or he runs it with his friend Andy, because I know Martin quite well, you know, it was a nice interview because we just had a nice rapport, you know, and it was just a very pleasant conversation, and I really appreciated it. It was it's a nice, warm conversation. It's a funny one, and we talk about all sorts of things that you might have heard me talk about before, but I think I talk about them in a slightly different way. So the description of the episode is this. For 15 years, Luke's English podcast has been helping people from around the globe learn English, and currently has over 1,000 episodes, which is true because it's 1,000 if you include all the premium episodes. That makes 1,000 episodes. The talent Luke has for teaching English in a funny and engaging manner is reflected in the huge number of devoted followers he has around the world. That's nice, isn't it, for them to have written that? At the time of recording this in early May 2024, his YouTube channel has 1.13 million subscribers. Luke talks about the phenomena of his podcast, about not setting up his own sports centre, about why he still teaches English classes in Paris, and about his stand-up comedy career. Even if you're from the south of England and can speak English perfectly, Luke's podcast... That's not me. Apparently I can't speak English perfectly, not today. Even if you're from the south of England and can speak English perfectly, Luke's podcast is still very entertaining. So that's Martin saying that he thinks that even native speakers can find my podcast entertaining. But anyway, you'll find a link for that episode number 26, I think, of Our Balls, the podcast. You'll find a link to it on the page for this episode and in the episode show notes, and listen to it, okay, and do my friend Martin a favor and bump up his podcast statistics a little bit. But genuinely, you might find the other episodes very interesting too, because it's just a really interesting way to explore people's stories in relation to the interesting careers that they've had over the years. And I'm going to have Martin on this podcast at some point as well. It'll be one of those conversation episodes that I produce over the next few weeks and months. One final thing before I talk about this concert and before I tell you which band it was. People are wondering when I'm going to do the next Walk and Talk episode. The Walk and Talk episode in Paris was really popular. Just a reminder, a Walk and Talk episode is where I go out. I have my camera, video camera attached to me, and I've got a microphone as well. And I go out and go for a walk and video and record myself speaking on a certain subject. Walk around Paris in a certain place and talk about a certain subject. The next Walk and Talk episode will be coming soon, but the reason I haven't done another one yet is because I promised myself that I would do a premium episode focusing on focusing on a lot of the vocabulary from the first Walk and Talk Paris episode. Right? Does this make sense? The Walk and Talk Paris episode was number 874. And so I said to myself, right, before I do another Walk and Talk, I've got to do a premium episode about language from the first one. Does that make sense? So I've been working on that. But premium episodes always take time to prepare. Even when I try not to take a lot of time to prepare them and try and keep them spontaneous, they still end up taking quite a long time to prepare. I would have recorded it today, but there wasn't enough time. But so as soon as I've done P60, which will be a vocabulary review for the Walk and Talk Paris episode, as soon as I've done that and published it, then I will be free to record a new Walk and Talk episode. And I'm planning to take a walk along the river, right, next to the river, of course. I can't walk on water. Unfortunately, only Jesus can do that. What are you talking about? I don't know. Sorry, that was a weird one. But I'm going to do one where I walk along the river. That's the idea. Along the path next to the river, which should be a bit more peaceful, slightly less noise, and some beautiful views as well. So that's, as soon as I've done P60, I'll do the next Walk and Talk episode. So that should be coming to you soon as well. Okay, right then. So what about this gig that I saw on Wednesday? So the band that I saw is called Tenacious D. Have you ever heard of Tenacious D? Now, some of you, I expect at this point, are going, fuck yeah! Because some of you will be fans of the D, like me. Others out there will be going, sorry, who? What? D? D what? Tenacious D. Tenacious D. Some of you have got no idea who they are, I'm certain of it. And then there might be a few people going, yeah, I know Tenacious D. Yeah, not a big fan. Anyway, I'm a fan. I love Tenacious D. And I was really happy that my friend asked me. He basically said, I've got a ticket. I've got a spare ticket for Tenacious D. Would you like to come? And I was like, yes! So I jumped at the opportunity to see them. Now, who are Tenacious D? So what I want to do is try and tell you about the band, tell you about the gig, and then try and sing you a song. I won't be able to do it justice because no one can really do a cover version of a Tenacious D song, but I'm going to do it anyway, right? Yeah, and I'll try and tell you the things you need to know in order to understand the song I'm going to sing for you at the end of this episode. Right. So Tenacious D are a double act. That means there's two guys. It's basically two members of the band. Although when they record studio albums, they get obviously other musicians together with them and they create a band. And in the past, Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters and from Nirvana, my friend Dave Grohl, who I met at a Japanese temple on a hillside in Kamakura in Japan. My friend Dave. Dave Grohl is the drummer from Nirvana, the guitarist and singer from Foo Fighters. He often joins them in the studio and plays drums for them. But so Tenacious D at the moment are on a world tour. It's called the Spicy Meatball Tour. And so, yeah, that's the show that I saw on Wednesday. So Tenacious D, a double act, and one of them is Jack Black, and the other one is a guy called Kyle Gass. So Jack Black and Kyle Gass. Now, Jack Black is actually a massively famous person. He's a hugely famous person in the movie industry in Hollywood. He's a huge Hollywood star, actually. He's not one of those... He's a slightly unconventional Hollywood star, but he's a massive Hollywood star in the world of comedy, really. He's kind of a comic actor. So, do you know Jack Black? He's been in films like School of Rock was his first big success. What else has he been in? How can I describe Jack Black? So, let me find his... no, not School of Rock. I want Jack Black. Let me find his filmography. and I'll just name some of the films. Now, obviously, the names of these films will be different, probably in your country. This is what it says on Wikipedia. Jack Black is an American actor, comedian, and musician. He's known for roles in family and comedy films, in addition to his voice work in animated films. His awards include an Emmy Award, a Grammy Award, and nominations for 3 Golden Globe Awards. So let me find the filmography. Where is it? Here we go. Let's see. I mean, he's been in Hollywood movies from a very young age. He was in even Waterworld, the Kevin Costner film. He was in The Cable Guy, the Jim Carrey film. He plays the friend he plays a side character in the film. He was in Mars Attacks, the Tim Burton film. He was in Enemy of the State, the Will Smith film. All side parts. It wasn't until, I guess, year 2000, he was in a film called High Fidelity, the film version of a great book, one of my favourite books by Nick Hornby, High Fidelity. High Fidelity, the film is about a guy who works in a record shop, and he talks about all the girlfriends he's had in his life and how they didn't work out. And he goes back he kind of reminisces about all of the failed relationships he's had and tries to work out what went wrong each time. And and one of the guys who works in the shop with him is played by Jack Black. This sort of very extroverted character, a very kind of rambunctious character. Is that a good word to describe him? Rambunctious, exuberant, boisterous. So very loud, full of energy. This is Jack Black. He's typically like this in his films. Sort of very energetic, always giving 1,000%, full of energy. And some people find him annoying. Like my brother is not a fan of Jack Black. He's not a fan of Jack Black. He finds him annoying, which I understand because he's very sort of, what's the word for it? Very animated, right? So he's lots of physical humour. He's kind of a bit like Jim Carrey, in the way that Jim Carrey is kind of like always very hyperactive and always doing crazy things, and he's got a very expressive face, very, very physically very expressive. Jack Black is a bit like that, but it wasn't until School of Rock 2003 that he, I guess, really became a huge star. School of Rock is about a guy who ends up becoming a school teacher by mistake, sort of thing, in a very posh school in the United States. And he can't teach the kids. He doesn't know what he's doing because he's become a teacher by mistake. And he ends up doing the only thing he knows, the only thing he can do, which is to play rock music. And he teaches the children how to become a rock band. And it's very funny and charming. And in the end, he does form actually a really great band with the kids. And so he's a very unconventional presence in the classroom, but he's extremely passionate about rock music, and he manages to kind of form a really great band with these kids. And the kids are also brilliant musicians too, and also like adorable and stuff. Jack Black was also in King Kong, the big Peter Jackson version of King Kong. He played one of the characters in that. He's in Nacho Libre. He plays the character of Ignacio in that. He was in The Holiday, which was a sort of a romantic comedy kind of film with Kate Winslet, Jude Law, and Cameron Diaz. Do you know who I'm talking about yet? Be Kind, Rewind. He's the voice of the panda in Kung Fu Panda in the English version. Right, the English language version of Kung Fu Panda, Kung Fu Panda 1, 2, 3, and 4. He's the voice actor of the main character, which is one of his most famous roles. He's in Tropic Thunder. What else? He was in Jumanji, the new Jumanji films. Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle. There's The Rock. There's Kevin Hart. and there's what's the other girl? Karen Gillan, and also Jack Black. All right, so do you know who I'm talking about? A massive superstar, really, especially in the English-speaking world. And to describe him, he's kind of like, well, I don't want to say he's fat, but he's kind of like portly, let's say. Without being offensive to him, Jack, if you're listening, I love you. I don't know how to describe you. You're undescribable. Okay? All right. Anyway, so there's Jack, is one of the members. And then the other member of the band is called Kyle Gass. And Kyle is also an actor. And Kyle has actually been in loads of films and things as well. Loads of TV series. He was a character in Friends. He was in... What else was he in? Anyway, Kyle has been in a lot of things too. But he is definitely less well known, I have to say. He's not quite as successful, or maybe he's not reached the sort of crazy levels of fame as Jack has. I mean, he's still a huge success. I mean, he's still a massive success with the things he's done, but he's not as recognizable, perhaps. He was in a Seinfeld episode. He's played small roles in some of Jack's films. He plays a character in Kung Fu Panda, and he's been in an episode of Friends, and so on and so forth. He's a kind of a character actor, all right? But Kyle is an excellent guitarist. He's an absolutely brilliant guitarist. The two of them are both sort of larger guys. I mean, kind of, they're quite large dudes, okay? Which is kind of, I mean, I think it's part of their comedy, their appearance. They look like kind of schlubby couch potatoes, but they're not at all, because they rock really hard, okay? And they work really hard. And on stage, they really perform with so much gusto, and they sweat, and they sing, and they rock out really, really hard. But first and foremost, they are actors, okay? And they met each other, I think, at like acting school or in some sort of acting society years and years ago, probably in the 90s, I think. That's when they first met each other. They met each other as actors in an actors group. And I think at the beginning, maybe they weren't too sure about each other. Like I think maybe Kyle felt quite threatened by Jack, because Kyle, in his mind, he was like the musician, the actor who also did music. And then Jack arrived, and Jack was also kind of an actor who did music too. I mean, Jack's not anywhere near as good on the guitar as Kyle is, although he makes up for it in pure gusto, pure enthusiasm and spirit. Jack's voice is absolutely incredible. I don't know if you've ever heard Jack Black sing, but he has this incredible voice. It's almost like operatic in its power and in its range. He's got a stunning voice. Anyway, that after they weren't sure about each other at the beginning, they did decide to join forces and form a band. Okay, and the band that they formed was called Tenacious D. Tenacious. If you're tenacious, it means you are persistent. You work really hard. And it actually comes from basketball. A commentator, an American basketball commentator, would talk about the defense of a basketball team as tenacious, real tenacious defense. Tenacious defense. Like in American English, they'd say defense sometimes rather than defense. So you can imagine an American basketball commentator saying, tenacious defense. I can't remember, it was the New York Knicks. It's the New York Knicks he was talking about. Tenacious defense. So when the defense would never give up, never, they were persisting, working really hard to maintain their defense. They were tenacious, working really hard to block the ball. So if you're tenacious, it means you're working really hard to hold your position, right? Holding your position, holding your principle, being determined, never giving up. That's like being tenacious. And tenacious defense, Tenacious D. So they took Tenacious D, that became the name of their band. And so Kyle, incredible genius, classical level guitar player, Jack, the man gifted with the golden voice, and they teamed up to create songs. And their music it's really they're kind of like a comedy band. They're a comedy band, really. They do comedy songs about often very sort of puerile things, like they'd sing songs about having sex. They sing ridiculous songs about stupid stuff, but they inject a lot of humour into what they do. Jack does all of his most intense comedy stuff, and it translates into something very, very funny and very, very appealing for me, anyway, and for a lot of other people. The arena was completely full on Wednesday, and I think they're playing to full arenas all around Europe and in many other places on this tour. Okay, right. What else do I need to say about them then? I mean, just I don't know. I can't. I don't know what else I can say. You just have to listen to them. But there's something very compelling in the act of making like music that's actually really influenced by heavy metal and serious like hard rock music, which is often very serious, very like epic in its scale, right? You think of bands like Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, like, you know, Ozzy Osbourne in the 1980s, like this epic, very serious, very heavy kind of music, which is like music that can move mountains, you know, music that's like something from some kind of Nordic myth, you know, like the music of Thor flying through the sky, smashing things with a hammer, but singing about fairly ridiculous things. Now, I said that I wanted to sing a song, and I think it's time I've got to do that. But, you know, there's no way I can sing anything like the way that Jack Black does, and that's a large part of the appeal of the band. But the song I wanted to sing was not actually one of the songs that they did during the show, but it's a song that I just really, really love, and it sort of tells the story of their relationship, of Jack and Kyle's relationship. Because the way it worked is that, as I said, they met each other at acting school or in this acting society, and formed the band and did, you know, concerts and stuff, and got a fan base and things like that. And they recorded their first album. And then around the same time, Jack's career suddenly took off, and he suddenly became this sensation. And he suddenly got really successful with School of Rock. And then he ended up in like a really big budget Hollywood blockbuster, King Kong. And suddenly his career skyrocketed, and he was one of the big bankable stars in Hollywood, going from big movie franchise to big movie franchise, and a huge success. Meanwhile, Kyle's career stayed more or less where it was, you know. And this is part of the mythology of the band, that we're not really sure how Kyle felt about that. It's not really clear. And this is one of the interesting things about bands. And I've talked about the Beatles before, and you'll hear my brother and I talking about Madness and stuff. One of the interesting things about bands is the dynamic between the people in the group, and speculating on what really is their relationship, and what was going on. How do they really feel about each other? And are they actually united in this very sort of special cosmic way through their music? Are they like brothers with an incredible bond, or is there friction? You know, is there friction between them? And you know, how is this all part of the special sauce that is in this recipe that makes a band so compelling and wonderful? And Tenacious D have got that. They've got the depth. They're not just a lightweight comedy band. They've got the depth of talent and a sort of compelling story at the heart of it as well. It's the basis for comedy a lot of the time. They have to sprinkle comedy powder over what they do, because if they don't add an element of comedy, then it can become a little bit sort of one-dimensional and a bit too serious and a bit cheesy. So they worked out that they have to put comedy sauce all over their work to get the right formula. But at the heart of it, the relationship, what is it? So, and how did Kyle really feel about Jack's success? Was he incredibly jealous? Did he resent Jack's success? Did Jack go off and forget about Kyle? How did it affect their relationship? And, you know, I've heard, I've read, and I've sort of got inklings that perhaps there was a problem with them, that Kyle perhaps resented Jack's focus on his movie career and the fact that Jack couldn't spend time making the music with Kyle. And I just wonder how much of this is reality, how much of it is myth. The myth is that Kyle was possessed with an intense, jealous form of rage against Jack, and it burned him from the inside and sort of destroyed him in some way. And Jack was unaware of this, and Jack was aloof, going off, focusing on his Hollywood career. Meanwhile, Kyle was sort of like maybe destroying himself in a sort of jealous rage, turning to drink and drugs and losing his mind. And then one day Jack learns about what's happened to his soulmate Kyle from the band, and he comes back and sort of rescues Kyle and takes him to the hospital where so the doctors can save him. You know, it's actually a very moving story of friendship. But I don't know how much of it's true or how much of it's just myth making. I don't know really. The band, recorded one album. They recorded. They then made a movie. The movie was called The Pick of Destiny. It was like the story of. It was like the Tenacious D movie, basically. And they put a lot of. It cost something like $20 million to make. You know, the way movies are so expensive, but it only took about $14 million at the box office, and so it was considered to be a commercial flop, and also it was a critical failure as well, meaning the movie critics said it was terrible, and that was a big problem. And I think Tenacious D, the band, almost died at that point. Jack's career continued to be successful despite the failure of Tenacious D, the movie. And I think this is probably the moment where the band possibly could have broken up at that point. But later on, they got back together and continued, and now they're like stronger than ever, it seems. So I want to do the Ballad of Hollywood Jack and the Rage Cage. That's the name of the song. Hollywood Jack, so that's Jack Black. Rage Cage, this is the nickname that Jack has for his friend Kyle, because his name's Kyle Gass. The initials are KG, or his nickname. KG are his initials, and Cage is a short form of KG. So Cage, and then just Rage Cage. That's the kind of nickname that Jack has created for Kyle. Rage is an intense form of anger. And it's kind of funny because Kyle he doesn't look like the sort of person who would be in a rage. He seems to be very kind of quiet. He seems to be fairly introverted. He's a very big guy. He's a huge guy. But he's a sort of very quiet, fairly introverted person, it seems. This is at least the way he seems in contrast to Jack anyway. So for Jack to call him Rage Cage is kind of funny in itself, because he doesn't seem to be a particularly rage-filled person. And that's why, again, this myth, this story of Kyle being possessed by a fiery, angry rage of jealousy against Jack seems to be a little bit kind of ridiculous, because on the surface, Kyle is kind of a fairly calm-looking, ordinary guy, really, I suppose. But the Ballad of Hollywood Jack and the Rage Cage, meaning this is the Ballad of Jack and Cage, or KG, Kyle Gass. So it's basically the story of Jack and Kyle's relationship. Let me tune the guitar before we start, because every time I do this on the podcast, there's always someone who says, "You could have tuned your guitar." For me, it sounds all right, but I don't have perfect pitch. There's bound to be someone out there listening to this podcast who's got perfect pitch, who can just detect that one of those strings, probably the G string, is not perfectly in tune. So I'm going to have to tune this up. I may well edit out the tuning, because that's not exactly the most riveting podcasting, is it? Listening to Luke tune up a guitar. Professional show business. This is how you introduce a song. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Hollywood Jack and the Rage Cage and my cover version of by Tenacious D. Hold on, let me just tune the guitar. No, that's not very professional. So I might just edit the tuning part. Yeah, flat. Okay, it's in. E is in. Let's go. A. Also flat. It needs to be a bit sharper. And we're in. Next string is B, isn't it? Oh God, I don't even know. D. Yeah, D. I mean, I'm a drummer, really. As you can tell. I'm not sure it's a wise idea to try and do a cover version of a Tenacious D song. But in the spirit of enthusiasm and passion and love for the music, I'm just going to do it anyway. I'll do my own version, right? I'll put the video. There's a video of them performing this live, and it's fantastic. And you'll see Jack's incredible voice. You'll hear his incredible voice and just see his performance. It's just, he puts 100% of his heart and soul into it. I don't have that kind of voice. But, I'll do my best. I'll do my own version. G. Next. B. Here we go. Okay, and top E. Okay. Okay, here we go. I've added a bit of the necessary reverb. Quite a lot. Here we go. This is the ballad of Hollywood Jack and the Rage Cage. Nothing could stop them when Jables and Rage hit the stage. And Hollywood Jack hit the big time and went to make movies. Rage Cage was left far behind in the dust of his dreams. And he grumbled and growled and watched Hollywood Jack on Jay Leno. He bellowed and said he'd be nothing without help from Cage. He burned up the photos of Jables and Cage doing mushrooms. Fuck him, I don't need no more Hollywood Jack anyway. So Hollywood Jack lived up high on a hill in a bubble. And Rage Cage lived deep in the broiling valley below. Yes, the Rage Cage bubbled with rage. He looked at the ground and he looked at the stage. The lava was throwing and boiling inside the old cage. As Hollywood Jack climbed the ladder of stardom before him, he watched as his indie credentials flew right out the door. He'd make millions and then he'd go out and make even more millions. He'd screen KG's calls and go partying with Zsa Zsa Gabor. No one respected him, they just rejected him. No one would represent Cage. Left on the streets of his dreams, he would cry and he'd rage for the stage. Hollywood Jack got a message that Cage was in trouble. They sent Cage away 'cause he had gone completely insane. So Hollywood Jack jumped upon a jet plane and flew all that night through the rain to be with his friend, to see what remained of his brain. Then Hollywood Jack told the doctors, "You've got to retrieve him. You've got the technology, use the techniques of your trade." He grabbed their lapels and he screamed, "By God, you must save him. 'Cause Rage Cage and I, can't you see that we're one and the same? Oh, Rage Cage, Rage Cage, there'll be magic inside that old name. And you know what you know when you're going completely insane. Oh, the Rage Cage, oh, the Rage Cage, the lion will roar once again. And you know, yes you know, when you're going completely insane. Nothing and no one could harm the old Rage Cage again. Nothing and no one could harm the old Rage Cage again. And nothing and no one could harm the old Rage Cage again. And nothing and no one could harm the old Rage Cage again. Nothing and no one could harm the old Rage Cage again. And Hollywood Jack and the Rage Cage were out once again. Oh, yeah, man, that's not as good as they do it, but I did my best. That's the end of the episode, listeners. You can find the lyrics for all of that. You'll find a link on the page for this episode on my website, right? Things like the stuff about Cage, what is it? The Rage Cage bubbled with rage. He looked at the ground, he looked at the stage, and he grumbled and growled and watched Hollywood Jack on Jay Leno. And where are the other things? Broiling and boiling, all that stuff. This is the ballad of... I'm going to just read the lyrics. This is the ballad of Hollywood Jack and the Rage Cage. Nothing could stop them when Jables and Rage hit the stage. And Hollywood Jack hit the big time and went to make movies. Rage Cage was left far behind in the dust of his dreams. And he grumbled. That's like... Grumbling is like complaining. Oh, that Jack Black. Rah, complaining, sort of like... Complaining to yourself. He grumbled and growled, like, growl is like, you know, what a dog or a lion would do. And watched Hollywood Jack on Jay Leno. Jay Leno is a famous talk show host. It's like a primetime TV talk show host. Like your Jimmy Fallon or, David Letterman or something. He bellowed, like shouted. You can imagine Cage like watching TV in his own home and shouting at the TV. He bellowed. He said he'd be nothing without help from Cage. Ha! He'd be nothing without help from me. He burned up the photos of Jables and Cage doing mushrooms. They must have had some friends, some photos of the two of them when they had had a great time doing mushrooms together, and they probably had some photos that he cherished, and he burned them all up in a jealous rage. Fuck him, I don't need no Hollywood Jack anyway. So Hollywood Jack lived up high on a hill in a bubble. If you live in a bubble, you just live in your own little world. You're not really connected to reality. He was living in this Hollywood bubble. And Rage Cage lived deep in the broiling valley below. Broiling. So broiling just means really hot. And broiling is normally a form of cooking. It's basically grilling. Okay. So if, broiled food is grilled food, but the broiling valley in this case is the very hot valley. So Jack's living up in a luxurious home in the Hollywood Hills, but Cage is still living in the valley, which is probably like much hotter, and homes are probably cheaper, you know. Cage lived in the broiling valley. Also, he's angry. And the rage cage bubbled with rage. He looked at the ground. He looked at the stage. The lava was throwing and boiling inside the old cage. Lava, you know, like the molten, red-hot stuff inside a volcano. The lava was bubbling and boiling inside him. I love the mythology and the extremely dramatic language. I don't think it was quite as sort of Shakespearean as this, you know. As Jack climbed the ladder of stardom before him, he watched as his indie credentials flew right out the door. Indie credentials, that basically if you've got a lot of integrity because you're an independent artist. So Cage watched Jack become a mainstream star, no longer an indie star. No, with the sort of integrity and respect, he just became like a sellout. He'd make millions and then go out and make even more millions. He'd screen KG's calls. So basically, he wouldn't. He'd send Cage's calls to voicemail, and he'd go and party with Zsa Zsa Gabor, which is an interesting reference. Basically, he'd go out and party with like Hollywood elites. And then about Cage, no one respected him. They just rejected him. No one would represent Cage, so he couldn't get a job. Left on the streets of his dreams, he would cry and rage for the stage. Then Hollywood Jack got a message that Cage was in trouble. They sent Cage away because he'd gone completely insane. So Hollywood Jack jumped upon a jet plane and flew all that night through the rain. So Jack's like flying to save Cage on his private jet. Or at least on a plane. I don't know if it's his private jet. To be with his friend, to see what remained of his brain. Then Hollywood Jack told the doctors, "You've got to retrieve him. You've got the technology. Use the techniques of your trade." He grabbed their lapels, like the lapels of their shirts or jackets, and, you know, and screamed, "By God, you must save him. Because Rage Cage and I, can't you see we're one and the same?" So Jack realizes that Cage is his soulmate, and he, in a moment of panic, he screams at the doctors to save him, to rescue him. Rage Cage, oh the Rage Cage, there be magic inside that old name, and you know what you know when you're going completely insane. Rage Cage, oh the lion will roar once again, and you know, yes you know, when you're going completely insane. And nothing and no one could harm the old Rage Cage again. And nothing and no one could harm the old Rage Cage again. Actually, sort of, I find it to be a really touching song, even though it's ridiculous in the level of drama, this kind of Shakespearean level of drama that there is in the song. I still find it in its heart. It's like a really moving song about two friends who split up. And one of them's incredibly jealous of the other one's success, but ultimately they come back together, and they both the successful one comes back and rescues his friend because they realise that they are soulmates, and the friendship that they started out with comes back together. And in doing that, when Jack Black came back, he rescued his friend, and it's a beautiful ending that now they've got back together. Cage can never be harmed ever again. That this kind of like their union as Tenacious D means that they are stronger. They're stronger together. It's beautiful. And that's the end of this episode. Thank you so much for listening, right? And I'll speak to you in the next episode. But for now, it's time for me to go and pick up my son, who he's only small. He needs to be looked after, right? So here we go. I'm going to go and do that now. Take care, everyone, and I will speak to you next time. But for now, it's time to say goodbye. Bye.